New Doctor, new companion, new producer, new script editor. Season 12 should have been a fresh beginning for the show, and it was, eventually. So, why did it take so long when the last time this happened, Season 7 hit the ground running? Hello, my name's Chris, what's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as we recap Season 12. Basically, I finished Season 12 with the takeaway that it was a more interesting season than it was a successful one. It ushered in a new Doctor, one who would go on to be perhaps the most iconic the show has ever had, yet who had probably the shakiest start of the four so far. And the show itself has a less than graceful gear change as a new producer and script editor come in to take the reins away from the hugely successful Pertwee, Letts and Dix triumvirate. And they sort of pale a little bit in comparison when it comes to their confidence in taking on Doctor Who. And I'm not saying that they pale into comparison with the Pertwee, Letts and Dix who had 5 years experience behind them. No, I'm actually comparing them to when those three came in for the beginning of Season 7. As debut seasons for either a regime or a Doctor go, Season 7 beats Season 12 in almost every single way. The blistering confidence of Doctor Who 1970 seems worlds away from the baby steps of Doctor Who 1975. The thing about baby steps, though, is they're cute. Once Robot is out of the way, a fairly dull hangover from the preceding identity of the show, the Ark in Space and the Sontaran Experiment make their faltering steps back out into space and time, but seem to do so with the confines of how the show used to be before it became bound to Earth, rather than forging their own way. Now, these two stories carry with them distinct reminders of the Troughton era, as if the show thinks it should revisit this way first in order to figure out how to do it. Now, that's a large contrast with how the show forged ahead on its own terms when the Doctor was exiled to Earth. Now, there you could argue that it had no choice to. The decision to exile the Doctor on Earth meant a new approach had to be found, whereas here, I guess there was the option to revert slightly, which they took. Now, I'm not saying that they took it wholeheartedly, but I am saying that they lent on it slightly while they seemed to try and work out what it was they'd got their hands on. And personally, I find the whole thing quite charming. Now, those two stories don't grab me as like truly excellent classic stories, but they are entertaining and they are very, very endearing. Especially heartwarming is watching Tom Baker take his first steps as the Doctor and noticing, especially with the knowledge of how he will come to dominate the part, just how uncertainly he takes it on when compared with his three predecessors. It's hard to shake off the knowledge of what a totemic figure Tom will become to Doctor Who, but when you do a marathon, watching the stories in context becomes the biggest reward in partaking in one. And this translates into the massive checkpoints being viewed in context as well, and that can throw up invaluable treasures, such as viewing certain titans of the show through a new lens. Namely, being able to see the Tom Baker as the new boy, and not quite getting a handle on the role straight away. That is endlessly fascinating to me. Now, he will occasionally make an acting choice that Hartnell, Troughton or Pertwee would never have made, and that marks him out as definitely the right man for the gig. But for the large part, he does still seem to be working it out. And yeah, okay, this makes for a less certain start than the other three, but it makes for easily the most fascinating one. So much so that I can't actually write him off, even if he doesn't put a truly indelible stamp on the character in the first half of his season. That is, of course, until we get to Genesis of the Daleks. This is a story where every element of the production is firing on all cylinders, and as such it has a very real feeling of a clear focus being realised. If Season 12 had been the show blurring its vision slightly up until this point, Genesis of the Daleks is where it pops on a pair of specs and sees everything it can do perfectly clearly. I used the word Epiphanous, and I really don't think that's overstating it, because it gives Doctor Who 1975 its own identity. It makes it feel like its own beast for the first time, and with that being a sort of like glimpse of what it can be going forward, it's incredibly tantalising. And in relation to Tom's performance, this sort of like renewed mission statement sees him calibrate his performance, sort of refining it to the point where he ends up having more opportunities and crucially leeway to show us the Doctor he is capable of giving us. And this results in breathtaking moments such as the "Have I that right?" speech and his hypothetical proposition to Davros, who enters the show barely moving and manages to take the crown of best villain yet with considerable ease, as well as taking on Time Lordy backstory in his own way and showing us his brooding side as he solemnly mourns the deaths of his two friends. It gives us the Fourth Doctor for the first time, and it gives Tom the chance to show him to us. As well as being populated by a stunning guest cast, helmed with great elan by David Maloney, written by a re-engaged and reinvigorated Terry Nation, presided over by a growing in confidence Hinchcliffe, and led by an increasingly focused leading man, all the while being shepherded on the page by a Robert Holmes who is discovering how to translate his voice to the show as a whole and repositioning the Daleks as something interesting again. Well, we end up with the very best story the show has had up until this point. And this being the case, it's even more of a jolt coming after a fairly sort of like sedate and almost sleepy start to the new era. Things revert, well actually they, get slightly worse than they were, with Revenge of the Cybermen, which comes along this time to make me realise that I don't actually like the Cybermen all that much, and which lost some of the headway made by Genesis of the Daleks, which is a huge shame, as it means that Season 12 looked like it was finally a brave new dawn, only to finish on its weakest story. Still, that glimpse of the Brave New Dawn is such a striking one that it doesn't just sort of like... Obviously, it makes it into the top 10. Number 10. Marco Polo. It's nice to see Marco Polo still hanging on to the top 10. When we consider the last story covered was Revenge of the Cybermen, looking back to Marco Polo shows how far the show has come and how wide it has cast its net in the meantime. One of Doctor Who's highlights. Number 9. The Green Death. Remembered by many as the one with the giant maggots, I feel that this one is more notable for being Joe Grant's farewell story. Katie Manning and John Pertwee eviscerate that final scene by pouring in far more emotion than you might expect. Extraordinary. Number 8. The Sea Devils. Contemporary Earth without unit, strange and weird score, and a generous helping hand from the Navy mark this one out as one of Doctor Who's most unique offerings. You could hear half a second of this soundtrack and you could picture that sea foot or the Sea Devil's string vests. A superior sequel which never feels like it sags at any point in 6 episodes. Number 7. The Aztecs. It has the best villain in the first season, it has some wonderfully seedy conflict between the Doctor and Barbara, and gives each of the 4 regulars their own thing to do. Marco Polo is great, but the Aztecs seems to refine the show into the magical. Number 6. The Mind Robber. Doctor Who off the hook. Rules be damned, here we've got unicorns, Rapunzel, Minotaurs and Medusa. With the TARDIS team that even in this early stage work incredibly well together. The surreal of the land of fiction works wonders in creating a feeling of being in unknowable danger. Number 5. The Time Meddler. For all the talk of how this shook the show's foundations by introducing one of the Doctor's own people for the first time, other than Susan, who began the show with the Doctor, this is also a really well put together script. As well as balancing the historical with the science fiction in a way no story had by this point, it also found harmony between the dramatic and the comedic, more successfully than most. Number 4. The Massacre. There's never been a Doctor Who story like this one since, and it's now 58 years old. A bold experiment, and one which for me really, really works. Number 3. The War Games. The second Doctor Swan Song is a 10-part epic which fundamentally alters the course of the show going forward. We find out he's a Time Lord, we meet a few more Time Lords, we have the Doctor's nefarious past hinted at which throws up all manner of questions, and we go to his home planet. 10 episodes which feel like 6. Phenomenal undertaking. Number 2. Inferno. The best third Doctor story has enjoyed a few seasons at the top now, but the appearance of Genesis has seen it dethroned. But let me tell you, it was supremely close this time. This has been the most I've ever enjoyed Inferno, and I thought long and hard about whether or not it's still the best even after Genesis. But when it came down to it, it lost out by a whisker. Number 1. Genesis of the Daleks. A monster which was in danger of being played out. Perhaps they should have stayed in the 60s. Then along comes Genesis of the Daleks, written by a rejuvenated Terry Nation, script edited by the effervescent Robert Holmes, which repositions the Daleks, introduces their creator, and gives the new Doctor not just some of his best material so far, but some of the best material any Doctor had ever been given. Genesis of the Daleks aside, season 12 did feel a little bit undercooked. Now, you might be thinking then, but you know, Sontaran Experiment and The Ark in Space both got 4 stars out of 5, and that is true. But Robots got things off to such a weird, shaky beginning, and Revenge of the Cybermen I thought was so below par, that the series as a whole doesn't really pop. And as charming as I found watching the show figure itself out again, that charm could only go a certain way. I needed, in order to be engaged, to be charmed by other elements. And luckily, there were 2 incredible ones in the Doctor's travelling companions. The dynamic of a trio sort of like did shake up more memories of the 60s, because obviously Pertwee had individual companion after individual companion after individual companion. Having Sarah and Harry brought back again those like late 60s vibes. But Sarah and Harry were so strong that they didn't feel like throwbacks. They felt like something new, and they are both so good. So where do they currently sit in the top 10 companions? Number 10. Victoria Waterfield. Without wishing to get ahead of myself, it can't be long before Victoria falls out of the top 10, but that isn't to suggest that I think ill of her. I used to, very much so in fact, but these days I can see just how great a character she was. Brought admirably to life by Deborah Watling. Number 9. Liz Shaw. One of the more regrettable elements of Pertwee's era is that we didn't get more Liz. She was dazzling in her only season, courtesy of Caroline John's exemplary performance, which managed to break free of some potentially limiting material. A brief spell on the TARDIS, but a memorable one. Number 8. Stephen Taylor. Companions' arcs and journeys are spoken about all the time with regards to the new series, but Stephen goes through a heck of a lot and the show does not shy away from it. Conflict with the Doctor, trials and tribulations which feel genuinely insurmountable, and Peter Purvis steers through it while still making Stephen feel like a real person. Number 7. Harry Sullivan. On paper, he isn't all that, to be honest. He's stoic, he's brave, and he's old-fashioned. He's basically the sequel to Ian. But this is always going to be the case when a companion is created for a reason, rather than as a character. Brought into the fold because there was the intention to make the Fourth Doctor an older man again, and someone would be needed for the more physical stuff, just as Ian was, there seems little to Harry on the page, yet they went and cast Ian Marter, who makes a heck of a lot out of it. It isn't a showy performance by any means, but he manages to imbue Harry with so many qualities that he transcends being that cipher of, younger action man conceived in lieu of an older Doctor. Lovely moments of proving himself, such as being ready to ballywell knock Steyer's head off, telling the Doctor where to go when he's helping him out of a sticky landmine situation, and trying to help the Doctor out of an explosive vest. His treatment of Sarah could have come across as hugely patronising, but Marter manages to make it sweet through his immensely winning performance. And Sladen has already impressed me greatly, and continues to, but Marter has won me over in a way I just wasn't expecting. He is excellent. And what's more, his being the new arrival to the crew manages to also help cement the Doctor as the Doctor. With Harry a rent alone from the Doctor, Tom is able to bathe in a kind of authoritative light. Harry works on absolutely every level. Number 6. Vicky Pallister. One of the most underrated of all of the companions in my view. Not that she's unfairly maligned, just that she rarely gets spoken about in the same breaths as Sarah Jane Smith, Rose Tyler and Donna Noble. And I think that's a big shame because she more than deserves to be up there with the show's more famous companions. Number 5. Jamie McCrimmon. A part of the show for almost as long as Patrick Troughton and longer than some Doctors, Fraser Hines is seriously impressive as Jamie. A companion from so far in the past as Jamie could have been a nightmare, but the relationship he builds with Troughton, Craze, Wills, Watling and Padbury make him one of the most valuable cast members the show has ever had. Number 4. Sarah Jane Smith. The old hand when you consider that Harry and the Doctor are technically the new arrivals this season, she managed to bridge the gap effortlessly. I've made much of my realisation that Elizabeth Sladen was doing such good work that it is she, I believe, who negotiates this change in personnel better than anyone else. And Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah is proving to be one of the most competent actors the show has yet had. In almost brushing off the regeneration as many companions eventually brush off the TARDIS being bigger on the inside, she doesn't really modify her performance all that much when presented with the new Doctor. It feels different because the Doctor is different and Tom is doing things John wouldn't have done. But I'm watching Elizabeth Sladen and I can see no difference in how she treats either of them. And that really sells him as the same man, and I think that's marvellous. I'll keep ringing this bell as I go on because it's something I'm watching very closely now. Number 3. Zoe Herriot. On this marathon, I think I see Zoe for how brilliant she truly is. I've always liked her, but she'd never have been at number 3 at season 12. Never, ever, ever. But here she is. Wendy Padbury is season 6's secret weapon, if you ask me, and kicks both Troughton and Hines up the arse with her arrival. Number 2. Barbara Wright. Still feels strange to have her at number 2, which has never happened before, yet I have to be transparent and fair as this marathon goes on. There's still very little in it between her and Jo, and I do maintain that Barbara feels like one of the more real characters that Doctor Who ever presented us with. Number 1. Jo Grant. The marathon's biggest surprise so far. Always liked her, very often loved her, but now she is unequivocally my favourite companion at this point. But I don't feel weird about it. A wonderful turn of events. And yes, while it might still be taking some getting used to having a new favourite companion, and that new companion being Jo, it's not taking any getting used to be loving Jo Grant. Jo Grant was always one of the very best companions, in my opinion. It's just that now, after this particular watch through, as it stands at the moment, I think she's just the best. It's strange to think that I'm now firmly in the 4th Doctor's era, while at the same time it feeling like he's still yet to properly, fully get going. Like previously, I actually detect a huge step up when it comes to him welcoming Leela on board. Obviously, that's still a little bit away yet. And I'm wondering, actually, then, whether or not Season 13 is going to see me notice a difference in him. I had a very different experience with Season 12 this time as I have previously, even though I've always felt Season 12 was always a kind of like halfway house between the end of the Pertwee era and the beginning of the Tom Baker one. This time I felt that was more pronounced. Like, I'm about to say goodbye to his new companion already, so I'm definitely in the Tom Baker years. It's still, I can't shake that feeling of being in the, like, you know, a sort of like limbo between eras. Either way, Season 12 has been a fascinating viewing experience, and as there are many reasons for doing a marathon, fascination is just as valid as enjoyment. And I don't think I've been this engaged in doing the marathon for a really, really long time. Even if the individual story appraisals might not have reflected that, this is the most interesting stretch of the marathon, I think probably since Season 3. And all that said, Season 12 has still given me a new overall favourite, so things are pretty rosy at the moment. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this look back at Season 12, then you know how YouTube works. Please do hit that like thumb and give it a share. It'd be great to get as many Doctor Who fans running the marathon along with us. And what do you think of Season 12? Is it a barnstorming debut for Tom Baker like Season 7 was for Jon Pertwee? Or is it tentative steps over shaky ground? Does the 4th Doctor's era take a little bit of time to get going? Or is it all downhill from here? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for the first story in season 13. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll meet you at Loch Ness.